Unions vent their anger in Athens after the worst train accident in Greece's history, which has killed dozens of people.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warns that Kyiv will respond to Russia's latest missile attack on Zaporizhia, both militarily and legally.
The European Commissioner for Home Affairs tells Euronews that the EU did well to manage the flow of Ukrainian migrants, despite many of them still struggling with habitation problems.
Unions have vented their anger in Athens, demonstrating outside the headquarters of the country's rail operator after the worst train accident in Greece's history, which killed dozens of people. They blame poor working conditions and a failure to modernize the network as being partially responsible in leading to the disaster. A new 24-hour strike has been called for Friday. Relatives of the victims are furious over the lack of information.
Καταγράψαν το όνομά μου και ακόμα δεν έχει πάρει κανείς τηλέφωνο πίσω. Προφανώς οι δικοί μου άνθρωποι είναι και δύο νεκροί αυτή τη στιγμή. Έχω χάσει τον αδελφό μου, έχω χάσει τον πατέρα μου. Δεν μπορεί να αλλάξει κάτι σε αυτό, το γνωρίζω. Σας το
Rescue operations are still underway under difficult circumstances, with the focus now being on the third carriage that is almost completely overturned. According to the Greek fire service, 56 people are still missing. The search is expected to conclude on Friday.
Volodymyr Zelensky has said he had constructive talks with Brazilian counterpart Lula da Silva. The two leaders discussed diplomatic efforts to stop Russian aggression. The Ukrainian president also said Russia will face consequences for its latest deadly attack on Zaporizhia.
На сьогоднішній звірячий російський ракетний обстріл Запоріжжя буде наша відповідь як військова, так і юридична. Окупант неминуче відчуватиме нашу силу. Силу справедливості в усіх сенсах слова. Я хочу подякувати усім нашим рятувальникам, які відночі розбирають завали будинку, під'їзд якого був зруйнований ракетою.
Meanwhile, a Ukrainian military expert said that Russians have been trying to surround Bakhmut for several months, with no luck. Kyiv has denied Moscow's claims that it has captured the eastern town.
Россияне сейчас зажаты фронтом, и они нигде просто не могут продвинуться, кроме как пробовать это делать в районе Бахмута, тем более Бахмут является таким уже для них информационным символом. Они его сами подсветили в течение полугода, рисовали победу, уже готовность, уже заходы, уже...
Over in Borodyanka, not far from the capital Kyiv, an exhumation of 3 unidentified bodies took place. The regional police chief says they have found 1,300 bodies of our citizens since the end of the occupation last year.
A rare moment of unity at the G20, a minute's silence in honour of the earthquake victims in Syria and Turkey. Otherwise, there was little to disguise the divide over Russia's war in Ukraine, which dominated proceedings. The US called it unprovoked and unjustified. Russia accused the West of blackmail and threats. China and Russia, whose foreign ministers met, refused to support the call for Russian forces to get out of Ukraine. The two countries were the only G20 members not to endorse the statement, demanding their complete and unconditional withdrawal. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, here meeting his Brazilian counterpart, did briefly meet Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov for around 10 minutes. Both men reportedly repeated their country's positions. The host's India said the differences could not be reconciled.
The experience of the last few years, financial crisis, climate change, pandemic, terrorism, and wars clearly shows that global governance has failed.
Narendra Modi called for unity to face the planet's many challenges. The Indian leader wanted to devote the summit to issues such as the development of the poorest countries or climate change. But as expected, Russia's war in Ukraine cast a long shadow.
1 year ago, the European Union opened its doors to Ukrainians fleeing Russia's invasion by activating this so-called Temporary Protection Directive. It was an unprecedented decision that enabled as many as 4 million people to stay in the EU until March 2024. Nearly 12 months later, and the European Commissioner for Home Affairs tells Euronews that the EU did well to manage, after showing her extracts from our reporting on the ground.
Мати спокій, бо мені постійно приходиться якісь робити папіри, які то закінчуються, то кінець року, і я не маю ніякого спокою, щоб займатися навчанням та вихованням доньки.
So basically, what can be done, in your opinion, to fasten these procedures that the refugees are facing?
Well, of course, we have a lot of challenges. I mean, we are hosting 4 million Ukrainian refugees. This is really a huge, huge challenge, of course, for the whole Europe, and especially for those member states that are most affected, like Czech Republic, Estonia, Poland, but also Germany. But I think really to have a perspective, if somebody has asked me 1 year ago, before the war broke up, will Europe be able to manage 4 million new refugees as well as we have done this? I think very few should have been asked positively without any hesitation. So taking into account the huge challenges, I think that the achievements are really great.
Other issues of concerns seem to be housing and work for Ukrainian refugees, as we can see in the next video.
Migrants are more or less adapted, right? But now there is an issue of their access to labor market, massive problem of apartments. This is the time that we need to think of more long-term strategy.
But I think this interview really shows where we are right now. We are moved away from the emergency situation and are now into dealing with other issues. We have already more than 600,000 Ukrainians working. We have another like 400,000 that are registered in the public employment service. So that means that approximately half of the refugees in working age are more or less on the labor market. That's not so bad, but of course we need to do more. We have 750,000 children in our schools, but what was also mentioned here, housing, of course, is a challenge in many, many regions and towns.
Do you think that this instrument, this Temporary Protection Directive, could be used again in other cases in the future?
Yes, I think so. I think it has proven that it works. I mean, just imagine if you compare to 2015, for example, where people were fleeing from the war in Syria, and the EU did not activate the Temporary Protection Directive. That existed already then but was not activated, and that left us also in a situation where we were very much divided on the issue on migration and refugees and asylum, and a lot of asylum systems were really clogged up with a lot of asylum applications. There were long waiting times. Now, of course, there are challenges, I will not deny that, but I think we are dealing with this refugee crisis in a much better way. Maybe it's not even a crisis, even though it's the biggest number of refugees since the Second World War.
Moldova's lawmakers voted on a draft project which aims to replace the Moldovan language with the Romanian language in law texts, including in its constitution. The project obtained a majority with 56 votes. The decision sparked uproar among deputies of the bloc of communists and socialists. The ruling honours a 2013 Chizanu court decision, which decided that the text of the Declaration of Independence takes precedence over the constitution. In the Declaration of Independence, the state language is Romanian.
Leaders are discussing the multiple threats the world's seas face in Panama at the Our Oceans conference. About 600 business people, environmental activists and academics are expected to rub shoulders at the two-day gathering in the Central American country. Oceans are coming under increased stress, not just from climate change, but also from pollution, overfishing and mining. Covering 3/4 of the Earth, the oceans are home to 80% of all life on the planet, providing nourishment for more than 3 billion people.
A judicial report concludes that MI5 may have had the opportunity to prevent the 2017 Manchester Arena attack. The bombing, carried out by Salam Abdemi with the help of his brother, left a total 22 dead and hundreds more injured. According to Judge John Saunders, MI5 considered intelligence about the suspect to be a possible national security concern, but didn't discuss it with colleagues quickly enough. Saunders explained that, had they acted on this information, Abdemi could have possibly been stopped at Manchester Airport on his return from Libya, or on the way to his car just hours before the bombing. Saunders also said that authorities failed to refer Abdemi to the government's counter-terrorism programme, known as PREVENT.
Sharp price rises for food, along with services and goods, meant that headline inflation in the Eurozone fell by less than forecast in February. Core inflation, which excludes energy and food prices and is seen as a more accurate marker, climbed in February to 5.6%. Eurostat data confirmed that headline inflation dipped only marginally, prices rising by 8.5% over the previous year. Food, alcohol and tobacco prices jumped the most, hitting 15% annually. Experts believe there's little room for improvement. According to Oxford Economics, food shows no signs of relief. Also of concern is the upward pressure on non-energy industrial goods and services. It's all raised fears that with inflation stubbornly high, the pressure on wages and interest rates will increase too. The signs are that the European Central Bank will not only add 50 basis points to the deposit rate in March, but will continue along the same path in the second quarter of the year.